I never used to think saying yes made you weak. Growing up, I was taught that compromise was a sign of maturity. That being flexible meant you understood what really mattered. That being agreeable meant peace. So when Alexandra came into my life, a woman who clearly had more experience, more presence, more everything, I didn't see the imbalance. I saw confidence. She walked like she belonged everywhere, and when she looked at you, it felt like you were the only one worth talking to. I met her at an art gallery opening, the kind of place I wouldn't normally be. I was tagging along with a friend, just trying to blend in, when she came over and asked what I thought of a painting I hadn't even looked at yet. I mumbled something about color and movement, and she laughed like I'd said something brilliant. From that moment on, she made it easy to fall into her rhythm. She liked things a certain way, the wine chilled, the music low, the weekends planned. I didn't mind. She had her own business, owned her own place, and always seemed in control. I respected that. I admired it. She told me early on that she'd dated men who were either intimidated by her or tried to compete. She said she was tired of games. She liked that I didn't make everything a battle. I thought that was a compliment. I thought we were building something solid. When we moved in together, it was into her house. That made sense. She had more space, a better location, and the mortgage was already in her name. I offered to contribute equally, split the bills, the groceries, whatever needed covering. But she waved it off. You handle the home, the meals, the life part, she said. I'll take care of the logistics. It wasn't framed as control. It felt like balance. Later, when we got married, she suggested combining everything under one name, hers. Streamlining, she called it. If something happens to one of us, it's easier if things aren't scattered. I didn't question it. I didn't have much to bring to the table, not compared to her. She had savings, investments, a business that actually made money. I had talent, yes, and my own small interior design studio, but it was still growing. She even helped me shut it down when I started getting burned out. Said I deserved to take a break, to focus on our life together. I told myself this was what a partnership looked like. I gave up the lease on my office, sold my tools, and let go of the small team I'd built. I trusted her. She said she'd support me while I figured out the next step. For a while, I believed we were still aligned. I started handling things around the house more, remodeling the kitchen, organizing the basement, even redoing the backyard. I found pride in the small details. She'd come home, compliment the lighting or the space, pour a glass of wine, and sit across from me like everything was good. But slowly, things changed. Not overnight. Just little things. She stopped asking for my opinion. She made decisions without telling me. Business trips grew longer. Dinners turned into solo evenings. When I asked if something was wrong, she smiled and said I was imagining things. When I suggested we start something new together, maybe open a design studio with both our names, she paused, then changed the subject. One afternoon, she came home and said we needed to move some assets for legal protection. She suggested transferring the rest of what remained in my name, my last small savings account, a title I'd held on one old van, even a domain name I used for freelance gigs, into hers. It'll just be easier that way, she said. We don't want things getting messy down the line. I hesitated. For the first time, something didn't sit right. But she touched my arm, looked me in the eyes, and said, "You trust me, don't you?" And of course I did. That night, I signed everything. A week later, I noticed she had changed the home Wi-Fi password and didn't tell me. When I asked, she said I didn't need it since I wasn't working online anymore. Her tone wasn't cruel. It was efficient, like I'd asked something unreasonable. That's when I felt it. Not anger. Not betrayal. Just small. Like a guest. Like a placeholder. I didn't know it yet, but I was no longer a partner. I was someone she was slowly phasing out. Not by force. Just by design. And I had given her the blueprint. All she had to do now was execute it. Quietly. Completely. I started to notice the timing. She would bring up logistics only when I was relaxed, after dinner, after a drink, or late at night when I was too tired to think through the implications. One evening, she sat next to me on the couch, flipped open her laptop, and asked if I could sign a few standard forms her accountant had sent. "It's just some restructuring," she said. "It's all still ours. Just in my name to make tax stuff easier." I asked if we could review it together, and she kissed my cheek like I'd said something sweet but naive. "You trust me," she reminded me. I nodded, but something in my chest stayed tight that night, even after I signed. A week later, I overheard her on the phone with someone named Renee. I wasn't eavesdropping, just walking through the hallway as she spoke in the office with the door cracked open. No, he has no idea, she said, her voice low and controlled. That's the beauty of it. Everything's already in place. By the time it becomes relevant, it won't be his problem anymore. I froze. Not because of what she said, though that was enough, but because of how she said it. Like it was business. Like I was a piece of a transaction. I didn't confront her. Not then. I didn't even know what I would have accused her of. Instead, I went into quiet mode. I started paying attention to every detail. The mail that stopped coming to me, the sudden drop in shared accounts, the calendar alerts I was no longer included on. She stopped pretending to ask for my input on anything. The house felt colder, even when it wasn't. Her tone became clipped, her schedule more erratic. I'm working late, she'd say, or I'm meeting with a new client. But the perfume on her coat smelled different. One day, I asked her directly, "Are we okay?" She tilted her head like the question confused her. "Of course we are," she said, then added. "But I think we should revisit our dynamic. I feel like I'm carrying a lot of the responsibility here." That hit hard. I'd given up my career, my independence, even my name on documents, for what I thought was trust. She framed it like a favor she had granted me. Like I was a burden, not a partner. That night, I didn't sleep. I pulled out my old laptop, the one she didn't know I kept in the attic. I logged into my email, looked through the last year of communication, searched for anything I might have missed. And I did miss something, plenty. I found emails between her and Renee Carter, her accountant, discussing personal asset reallocation, clean transitions, and preparation for next phase independence. My name wasn't mentioned directly, but I knew. I started backing things up, emails, screenshots, receipts, timestamps. Quietly, patiently. I didn't know what I'd do with them yet, but I knew I needed them. Over the next few weeks, I watched her carefully. She grew bolder, less careful. One night, during a wine-fueled dinner with some of her business friends, she said, "Jason's such a calm presence. He's like background jazz. Always there, always polite." Everyone laughed politely. I smiled too, but I felt the sting. Background jazz. A decorative element. That's what I had become to her. Something soft, low, forgettable. That's when I realized something important. She didn't respect me anymore. Maybe she never really had. Maybe I was just a convenient stage prop, someone she could manage, mold, and quietly phase out when the script changed. I started talking to Tobias, a lawyer I had worked with years ago when I was still freelancing. We met for coffee. I told him everything, not as an accusation, but as a timeline. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he asked one question. "Do you want out clean, or do you want it back?" I told him I wanted the truth protected. Whatever else happened, I wasn't going to disappear quietly. Tobias walked me through what I needed. Copies of everything I'd signed, records of contribution, evidence of informal agreements, proof of my investment, not just financially, but in sweat, time, and reputation. I had most of it. The rest I could get. At home, Alexandra had grown more distant but oddly upbeat. She seemed relieved, like she was nearing the end of some long, difficult operation. Like her life was finally about to begin, without me. She asked me one night if I'd ever thought about taking a break, or maybe visiting my brother for a while. I told her no. I told her I liked being home. She frowned, then forced a smile. "Just checking," she said. That's when I knew. She was almost done with me. In her mind, I was already gone. A piece moved off the board. A placeholder phase that she could erase with a new coat of paint and a press release. But I wasn't gone. I was still here. And while she thought I was sleeping in the spare room, waiting to be dismissed, I was getting ready. Not for revenge. For clarity. For balance. For truth. Because this life, this house, this marriage, this identity, wasn't something I rented. It wasn't something I'd borrowed. I built it with my own hands. And I was ready to prove it. I began to notice just how many places I had been erased from. Her business website no longer listed me as a co-strategist, though I had helped design her branding from day one. The guest room, formerly my home office, had been cleared out and turned into what she called a reset space, filled with candles and minimalist furniture. My name was no longer listed on any of the household bills. And when the new car arrived, sleek and white, it was leased under her business, though she referred to it as our upgrade. It was a death by 1,000 revisions. None of it dramatic, all of it deliberate. And yet, in public, she performed affection. Dinner parties, social events, smiling as she introduced me as her grounding presence. But even then, she said it like a compliment for a dog. Steady, quiet, predictable. She wore power like a second skin. And I realized something. She wasn't just removing me. She was rewriting me, reshaping the narrative so that when I finally vanished, no one would question it. They'd nod and say, well, he was always in the background. So I stopped trying to reinsert myself. Instead, I focused on gathering. I pulled files from old backups, photos of me renovating her kitchen, invoices I sent for freelance work that was never paid, but used in her company's rebranding, copies of the marriage agreement she insisted was just for formality. She thought my silence was weakness, but it was strategy. One night, I waited for her to leave for a client dinner and went into her office. I didn't touch her laptop. I didn't need to. I opened a drawer I knew she rarely used and found a folder labeled Separation Scenarios. Inside were typed drafts, letters, timelines, contingency plans. I scanned phrases like narrative control and minimize disruption to personal brand. It was all there, my phase-out, staged like a PR campaign. I took photos of every page. Then I closed the drawer and made sure nothing looked disturbed. I wasn't going to confront her with anger. That would give her power. Instead, I made appointments. Quiet meetings with two of her former employees who had reached out to me years ago when they left the company under strained terms. They had stories about financial redirection, about ideas that were mine being repackaged and sold under her brand. One of them, Lila, even had email chains where I had originally pitched the concept she now used in her most successful campaign. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about removing the curtain, letting people see who had really been behind the set design. Tobias helped me file discreet legal claims. Nothing public yet, just enough to lock certain assets in place, freeze particular accounts, and set a quiet timer on the whole machine she had built. Meanwhile, at home, she became more and more casual. She'd walk past me in silk robes, humming, barely acknowledging my presence unless it was to ask if I could handle something small, a delivery, a repair, a package to return. You're good at the practical stuff, she'd say. That's what I always appreciated about you. I almost laughed. Appreciation wasn't the word. She tolerated me like she tolerated background noise, only if it didn't interfere with the show. But I let it play out. I let her believe I was fading. Until one morning, she stood in the doorway of the kitchen, coffee in hand, and said, Jason, we should probably talk about next steps. I didn't react. She continued, this arrangement, it's not sustainable. I've been thinking maybe we get ahead of things, do it the clean way. Quiet. No mess. Her voice was rehearsed, polished. She was already in campaign mode. You could take some time, maybe go visit your brother. Get your head clear. I looked at her and asked, do you mean divorce? She blinked, surprised I'd said it aloud. Not immediately, she said. But yes, eventually. I just think it's time. I nodded. Okay, I said. Let me know when you're ready to have a real conversation. She smiled, relieved, thinking I was folding, thinking I was finally out of steam. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Because now, the story was moving exactly where I needed it to. Her words, her phrasing, her suggestion, it was all on record. I'd been quietly recording conversations for weeks. Tobias had advised it, given the state-level laws. It was legal and clean. And more importantly, it was her voice, laying out her plan, confirming what I already knew. I wasn't just being dismissed. I was being strategically replaced. But the story wasn't hers to write alone. Not anymore. The shift didn't happen with drama. There were no slammed doors, no screaming matches, no ultimatums. Just quiet precision. She began spending even more time away. Dinners, conferences, retreats, she called them. At home, I was little more than a house manager. She started referring to the house as my space when on the phone with colleagues. Not our home, just hers. One afternoon, a man I'd never met showed up to inspect the pool heater. Alexandra said you'd let me in, he told me. I hadn't heard a word about it. Later, I asked her, and she waved it off. Oh, right, I forgot. He's just part of some upgrades I'm doing. I looked at her. You didn't want to run that by me? She took a sip of her drink, smiled without warmth, and said, Jason, this is just easier if you don't make everything a discussion. I said nothing. I didn't need to. I'd recorded the whole exchange. It was just more proof of how she viewed me, not as a partner, but as an obstruction to be navigated. A remnant. Around that time, she changed the entry code to the garage and didn't tell me. I found out when I came home with groceries and couldn't get in. When I asked her about it, she said, "Oh, I didn't think you needed it anymore." She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. In her mind, the process was complete. I had been phased out, boxed up, and shelved, still present, but irrelevant. But I knew something she didn't. I wasn't staying quiet out of resignation. I was collecting. Tobias and I had a timeline. Every oversight, every suggestion, every comment where she implied the house was hers alone. We had it all. And while she thought I was too passive to fight back, we were already laying the legal groundwork to prove my contributions, restore asset parity, and make the truth public if necessary. The final piece clicked into place the night I found the updated draft of her will in the printer tray. I hadn't gone looking for it. I was printing some old emails when I noticed the stack. I skimmed the first few pages, and there it was. She had rewritten everything. I wasn't mentioned. Not once. Everything was to be divided between her company, a charitable foundation I'd never heard of, and a business partner named Renee Carter. The same Renee she'd whispered to on the phone months earlier. That was the moment it turned. Not emotionally. I'd already crossed that bridge. But strategically, she'd gone too far. This wasn't just a slow fade out. It was erasure. And not just of me, but of everything I had built with her. She was scrubbing my name from the story entirely. So I made a final move. I reached out to the same publication that once profiled her agency years ago. Back then, they'd interviewed me too, though the quote they used was small, buried in the layout. I still had the editor's contact. I told her I had something she might want to see. A story, not a tabloid scandal, but a detailed look into what happens behind the glossy image of a power couple. I didn't name names. I just showed receipts, design documents, unpaid invoices, branding strategies sent from my email, marriage contracts, property renovation logs, all with dates, timestamps, and context. The editor listened. Then she said, "Let's talk more." I didn't want revenge. I wanted correction. At home, Alexandra was prepping for some kind of event, a product launch, maybe, or a networking gala. She had stylists coming in, deliveries arriving. She even hired a photographer to capture authentic lifestyle content. She asked me to move my things out of the main living area just for the shoot. I agreed. I moved them right into a storage unit with my name on the lease. Then I contacted a real estate attorney and quietly began inquiring about the property's history, ownership trail, and shared investment value. Turns out, some of my prior repairs had increased the taxable value, and that opened a door. A legal one. Tobias filed a claim of informal contribution with evidence attached. Not a lawsuit. Not yet. Just a legal notice that something wasn't as one-sided as it seemed. And that's when the silence began. She received the notice in the mail, certified, and I watched her face as she opened it. No shouting. No accusations. Just a flicker of something behind her eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition. That she had misread me. That she'd mistaken my calm for surrender. That night, she didn't speak to me. Not even in passing. The next morning, she left early. Her phone buzzed constantly for hours after. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. I just sat at the kitchen table and waited for the first ripple to hit the surface. The silence lasted 3 days. She didn't ask me about the notice. She didn't ask if I'd spoken to anyone. She didn't even ask why I hadn't moved out yet. But I saw the changes. She started locking her office door. She began taking phone calls outside, pacing along the edge of the backyard like she didn't want her voice bouncing off the walls. The stylist visit stopped. The caterer canceled. The photo shoot was postponed indefinitely. Her carefully constructed image was fraying at the edges. And still, she said nothing. It wasn't guilt. It was calculation. She was waiting to see what I really had. She'd underestimated me for so long that now, when I showed her a glimpse of resistance, she couldn't tell if it was bluff or fire. Meanwhile, Tobias and I moved ahead. We didn't need court yet. We needed leverage. And we had it. Emails, contracts, voice recordings, receipts. Things that showed I wasn't a tenant in her life. I was a co-founder of the home she tried to make her brand. And the timing couldn't have been better. The magazine piece was in progress. They'd already assigned a journalist. Discreet, quiet, known for doing deep profile features on disrupted partnerships. The story wouldn't run tomorrow, but the questions had already started. I knew, because the reporter had reached out to some of our mutual contacts for background. I didn't need the world to hate her. I just needed the truth to surface. One evening, I came home to find her sitting in the living room with a glass of wine and a folder in her lap. She looked up as I walked in. "We should talk," she said. I sat across from her, letting her control the opening move. "I've received some things," she began, careful, smooth. "Notices. Inquiries." She tilted her head slightly. "You've been busy." I said nothing. She opened the folder and slid a sheet toward me. "This could be settled easily," she said. Quietly. "No need to drag things out." I glanced down at the paper. It was a proposed buyout. A small cash sum, non-disclosure agreement, an acknowledgement that I had no ongoing stake or entitlement. I looked up. "You think I'd sign this?" "It's fair," she said. "You walked away from your business. You've been out of work for nearly a year. I've supported the household." She leaned back, confident again. "This gives you a clean exit. A respectable one." I tapped the paper once. "You forgot to include the part where I funded your first campaign with my own savings. Or the part where I built your entire office design from scratch. Or the years I gave up to be here." Her eyes narrowed just a little. "You were compensated," she said, cooler now. "You lived well. You didn't want for anything. Except credit," I replied. "Except space. Except the truth." She laughed softly. Not kindly. "You're making this personal." I shrugged. "Isn't it?" She stood and walked to the window. Her reflection in the glass looked smaller than I remembered. "You could ruin everything," she said quietly. "You don't know how much is tied to my name. Then maybe you shouldn't have tried to erase mine." She turned, eyes sharp now. "What do you want, Jason?" I stood slowly. "I want you to understand that you don't own people. You can't build a life on someone else's back and then tell them they were just standing there." For the first time in a long time, she had no ready reply. I left the room. That night, I received an email from her assistant. Apparently, Alexandra wanted to restructure internal ownership documentation for her brand. I wasn't mentioned by name, but I knew exactly what she was trying to do: lock things down before the article dropped, before Tobias filed anything further. It was damage control, but it was too late. The momentum had shifted. Our friends, mutual acquaintances, clients, neighbors, had started asking quiet questions. "Are you two okay? Haven't seen you together lately." Heard something strange from one of the gallery folks. She couldn't control all of it. Her empire was based on poise and perfection, the illusion that everything was seamless. But now people were looking too closely, reading between the lines. I didn't need to burn it down. I just needed to let the cracks show. Tobias sent the final set of documents the next morning. Official notice of claim for contribution, request for formal arbitration, and a freeze on certain discretionary accounts pending ownership clarification. It was clean, professional, devastating. She tried to call me that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened to it once. Her voice, so composed, said, "I think we've both let this get bigger than it needs to be. Let's talk tonight. Please." But the truth was, there wasn't anything left to talk about. She'd spent years preparing for a version of the future where I no longer existed. All I'd done was agree with her vision, just not on her terms. The final meeting wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no tears, just a long white table in a quiet office downtown, with two attorneys on one side, Tobias and me on the other, and Alexandra seated at the head like she still thought she could steer the outcome. She wore gray, neutral, strategic. Her nails were bare, her hair pulled back tight. Control in every detail. But I saw the small tells, the tapping of her pen, the way she glanced down whenever certain documents were mentioned. The leverage had worked. Tobias had presented a timeline so comprehensive, so carefully documented, that even her legal team didn't argue. They asked questions, clarified language, but they didn't deny. The contributions I made, to the home, to the brand, to the value she built while calling me background, were undeniable now. I wasn't asking for charity. I wasn't asking for revenge. I was asking for what I had earned. And I got it. The agreement we signed was quiet, sealed, and binding. A financial compensation package far larger than what she had tried to offer. Joint acknowledgement of creative contribution to her early campaigns, filed with the Copyright Office. A percentage of royalties from two of her product lines that had originated with concepts I had designed. And, most satisfying of all, the house, no longer solely in her name. The title was now split. If she wanted me out, she'd have to buy me out properly. No more edits. No more erasures. When the meeting ended, she stood and smoothed her blazer. She didn't look angry, just tired. She said, "You played this well." I replied, "No, I just stopped letting you direct the scene." I walked out without shaking her hand. That night, the article went live. It wasn't cruel. It was factual. It told the story of a woman who built her brand with the help of a silent partner she later tried to quietly remove. It didn't name her outright, but it didn't need to. Anyone who followed her work would know. And it wasn't the story itself that caused the damage. It was the timing. Investors pulled out of a planned expansion deal. 2 collaborators put projects on hold. The cracks widened. She issued a carefully worded statement, one that didn't deny, but tried to reframe. But the narrative had already moved beyond her control. I didn't gloat. I didn't post. I didn't comment. I just packed the rest of my belongings from the master bedroom and moved them into a small condo downtown. Something Tobias helped me lock in with my new share of the assets. It wasn't about luxury. It was about breathing space. And silence. Not the heavy kind I'd lived with for months, but the clean kind, the kind that feels like air. Weeks later, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a small envelope and a photo. The envelope contained a short note. "You were never just background. I just didn't know how to share the spotlight." The photo was from that gallery night, when we first met. Someone had snapped us mid-conversation, me talking, her smiling. We looked like 2 people about to start something beautiful. I kept the photo, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder. Not every betrayal is loud. Not every wound bleeds. Some look like love until they're fully unwrapped. I never needed her spotlight. I just wanted truth. And in the end, that's what I took back, with interest.